The harsh, fluorescent lights of Precision Auto Care had long since been turned off when Victor Harrington's imported Italian sports car rolled into the employee parking lot at 11:30 in the evening. The sleek vehicle stood out like a sore thumb among the modest sedans and pickup trucks that normally filled the spaces during business hours. As CEO of Precision Auto Group, a chain of 27 auto repair shops across 3 states, Victor rarely visited individual locations outside normal business hours, but he'd left his custom leather wallet on his desk during a surprise inspection earlier that day, and the thought of being without it until morning was simply unacceptable. Victor stepped out of his car, his polished Oxford shoes clicking against the asphalt as he approached the rear service entrance. He was a striking figure, 52 years old, with salt and pepper hair meticulously styled, wearing a tailored suit that cost more than what most of his employees earned in a month. The evening air felt cool against his face as he punched in the security code and pushed open the heavy metal door. He expected darkness inside. Instead, a faint glow emanated from the far corner of the service bay. "Who's there?" Victor called out sharply, his hand instinctively reaching for his phone. "This is private property." The light shifted slightly, and Victor cautiously moved forward between the hydraulic lifts and tool cabinets. As he rounded the corner past a partially disassembled sedan, he found the source of the light. A young man sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, his back against the wall. A small booklight was clipped to the thick textbook balanced on his knees. Around him lay several other books, a worn notebook filled with diagrams, and a thermos. His blue Precision Auto Care uniform shirt was unbuttoned over a plain white t-shirt, and the name patch read, "Nathaniel." "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Victor demanded, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Nathaniel Carpenter looked up, surprisingly calm despite being caught. At 31, he had the weathered hands of someone who'd been working with tools since childhood, but his eyes held an unexpected intelligence that momentarily caught Victor off guard. "Mr. Harrington," Nathaniel said, carefully marking his page before closing the book, "I apologize if I startled you. I was just studying after my shift." Victor glanced down at the books scattered around the mechanic. Advanced automotive engineering, business ethics, and what appeared to be materials for an MBA program. A calculator and several mechanical pencils were arranged neatly beside a stack of graph paper covered in complex diagrams. "Studying," Victor scoffed, gesturing around the empty service bay. "This isn't a public library. This is my business, and you're trespassing after hours." Nathaniel began gathering his materials with methodical movements. "With respect, sir, I finished my assigned repairs 2 hours ago. I detailed Mrs. Abernathy's Volvo, completed the transmission rebuild on Mr. Gonzalez's truck, and prepped all the service bays for tomorrow's appointments. Everything's logged in the system." He stood up, and Victor was reminded that Nathaniel was a good 3 inches taller than his own 6 feet. The mechanic wasn't intimidating. There was something gentle in his bearing despite his physical size, but he carried himself with quiet dignity. "That's not the point," Victor said dismissively. "You can't just hang around after your shift playing student. What's next? Employees camping out in the break room?" A slight frown crossed Nathaniel's face. "Sir, I'm not playing anything. I'm pursuing my degree in automotive engineering and business administration. The lighting at my apartment building has been unreliable since the storm last week, and I have exams coming up." He paused, then added, "I always clean up after myself, and I've never disturbed anything." Victor's eyes narrowed. For 6 months, Nathaniel had been just another mechanic, competent enough, but ultimately forgettable. Customers seemed to like him, but Victor had never paid him much attention. Yet here he was, surrounded by advanced textbooks, speaking with the confidence of someone who believed he deserved more than turning wrenches for hourly pay. "Listen carefully," Victor said, stepping closer. "People like you have a place in the world. Don't pretend to be something you're not. It's pathetic." He gestured toward the textbooks. "Engineering? Business administration? Do you have any idea how competitive those fields are? How many people with actual potential wash out? Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression. Not anger, but something more concerning. Pity. People like me, sir, Nathaniel repeated softly. And what kind of people would that be exactly? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications that made Victor uncomfortably aware of how his words might be interpreted. He hadn't meant it the way it sounded. He'd meant people without connections, without elite education, without the right background, hadn't he? You know exactly what I mean. Victor recovered, his voice hardening. Mechanics. People who are good with their hands, but don't have the academic foundation. People who think reading a few textbooks after hours will somehow transform them into engineers or executives. Nathaniel nodded slowly, as if he'd confirmed something he'd long suspected. He continued packing his books into a worn backpack, his movements unhurried. "I'm sure the Lord has a plan for all of us, Mr. Harrington," he said quietly. Victor rolled his eyes. "Oh, spare me the religious nonsense. That's exactly what I'm talking about, clinging to fairy tales instead of facing reality." For the first time, a flash of genuine emotion crossed Nathaniel's face. Not anger, but something like compassion mixed with resolve. "My faith isn't a fairy tale, sir. It's what gives me strength when people underestimate me or judge me without knowing my story." He zipped up his backpack and straightened. "But you're the manager, and this is your place of business. I apologize for overstepping." Victor felt an irrational surge of irritation at the mechanic's composure. He'd expected defensiveness, maybe even pleading for his job. Instead, Nathaniel stood before him with the quiet confidence of someone who answered to a higher authority. "You're fired," Victor said abruptly. "Clear out your tools tomorrow before the shop opens. Don't expect a reference." If Nathaniel was shocked or upset, he didn't show it. He simply nodded once, accepting the decision with a dignity that only irritated Victor further. "I understand, sir," Nathaniel said, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. "Thank you for the opportunity to work here these past 6 months." As he reached the side exit, Nathaniel paused and turned back. "Mr. Harrington, there's a saying my grandfather was fond of. The measure of a person isn't in how they treat their equals, but in how they treat those they believe are beneath them." He offered a small smile. "I'll be praying for you, sir." Before Victor could formulate a response, Nathaniel walked out, leaving Victor alone in the service bay, surrounded by the tools and vehicles that had made him wealthy. "Praying for me," Victor muttered derisively, as if that would accomplish anything. He retrieved his wallet from his office and left, the encounter with the mechanic already fading from his mind. By the time he arrived home at his luxury condominium, Victor had convinced himself he'd made the right decision. Employees needed to know their place. Structure was important. Boundaries were essential. What Victor Harrington couldn't possibly know was that his brief interaction with Nathaniel Carpenter had just set in motion a chain of events that would shake the very foundation of everything he'd built. Because Nathaniel wasn't just a mechanic with religious delusions and unrealistic ambitions. For 6 months, he had been systematically documenting every instance of fraud, every safety violation, and every unethical business practice that Precision Auto Care inflicted on its unsuspecting customers. The evidence was meticulously organized, the pattern irrefutable, and Victor had just given him the perfect reason to use it. The following morning, Victor woke to the insistent buzzing of his phone. His head pounded slightly from the 3 glasses of 18-year-old scotch he'd consumed after returning home. Squinting at the screen, he saw it was Diane Phillips, his regional manager. "This better be important," he growled into the phone. "Victor, we have a situation." Diane's normally composed voice sounded strained. "It's about Nathaniel Carpenter." Victor sat up, suddenly alert. "The mechanic I fired last night? What about him?" "You fired him?" Diane sounded shocked. "When were you going to tell me? He's one of our highest-rated technicians. Customers specifically request him. His customer satisfaction scores are nearly perfect." Victor waved his hand dismissively, even though Diane couldn't see him. He was studying in the shop after hours, using company property as his personal library, completely unprofessional. There was a prolonged silence on the other end of the line. "Victor," Diane finally said, her voice careful, "what exactly was he studying? Engineering textbooks, business courses, some MBA nonsense. Why does it matter?" Another pause. "Because Nathaniel Carpenter graduated summa cum laude from Georgia Tech with a degree in mechanical engineering 5 years ago. He's been working on his MBA in business ethics through their executive program. The only reason he was working as a mechanic was for practical experience, while he develops his thesis on ethical reform in the automotive repair industry." Victor felt his stomach drop. "How do you know this?" "Because I just got a call from Patricia Lowell at the Better Business Bureau. Apparently Nathaniel has submitted a comprehensive report detailing systematic fraud at our Lake City location. The BBB is giving us 24 hours to respond before they go public with the allegations." Victor's mind raced. "What kind of allegations?" "Everything, Victor. Charging for parts never installed, marking up labor hours, performing unnecessary repairs, falsifying safety inspections." Diane's voice dropped. "He has documentation going back 6 months, videos, invoices, customer testimonials. It's detailed, organized, and damning." The room seemed to spin around Victor. "It's his word against ours. He's a disgruntled ex-employee making false claims." "It's not just his word," Diane countered. "He has time-stamped video from the shop, internal emails, work orders with your signature authorizing shortcuts on safety-critical repairs." Victor felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. Those were cost-saving measures, not safety violations. "Tell that to the family whose brakes failed after we certified their vehicle as safe," Diane shot back, her professional demeanor cracking. "The accident report is part of his documentation." Victor stood and began pacing his bedroom. "This is absurd. He's been planning this for months. It's a setup. It doesn't matter if he planned it. What matters is whether it's true." Diane's voice had regained its professional edge, but with a new coldness. "Is it true, Victor?" He didn't answer immediately. The profit margins at Precision Auto Group had always been his primary concern. The company had expanded rapidly under his leadership, and shareholders were pleased with the returns. If corners were occasionally cut, if customers sometimes paid for services they didn't strictly need, wasn't that just business? "We operate within industry standards," he finally said. "That's not what I asked," Diane replied. "The board is convening an emergency meeting at noon. They expect you to be there." The line went dead before Victor could respond. He stood motionless, staring at his phone. How had this happened? How had a mechanic, a nobody with delusions of grandeur and imaginary friends in the sky, managed to threaten everything he'd built? As Victor showered and dressed for what promised to be the most challenging meeting of his career, his mind kept returning to Nathaniel's parting words. "The measure of a person isn't in how they treat their equals, but in how they treat those they believe are beneath them." The words felt like an accusation now, a judgment he couldn't escape. By the time Victor arrived at the corporate headquarters of Precision Auto Group, his shock had transformed into simmering anger. This was his company. He had built it from 3 struggling shops into a regional powerhouse. No sanctimonious mechanic with a savior complex was going to take that away from him. The board members were already seated in the conference room when Victor entered. Normally, they greeted him with respectful deference. Today, their expressions ranged from concern to outright hostility. "Victor," Harold Whitman, the chairman of the board, gestured to the empty seat at the head of the table. "We've been reviewing some troubling information." "Before we begin," Victor said, attempting to seize control of the narrative, "I want to make it clear that these allegations come from a disgruntled former employee who was terminated for unauthorized use of company property. His claims are exaggerated, if not outright fabricated." Harold's expression didn't change. "We've reviewed the documentation, Victor, all of it. including the videos of you personally instructing managers to charge for premium parts while installing refurbished components. Victor felt the blood drain from his face. Those conversations were taken out of context. Were they? Another board member, Elizabeth Chen, slid a folder across the table. Because we've had independent auditors reviewing the financial reports from your Lake City location since 6 this morning. The discrepancies are significant and consistent with the allegations. Victor opened the folder and scanned the preliminary audit findings. The numbers were damning. Profit margins at Lake City were 28% higher than industry averages, achieved largely through fraudulent labor charges and parts markups. Every business has inefficiencies, Victor attempted. Bookkeeping errors. Stop. Harold's voice was quiet but commanding. This isn't about bookkeeping errors. It's about systematic fraud, safety violations, and deceptive business practices. Practices that you not only knew about, but actively encouraged. Victor looked around the table, searching for any sympathetic faces. He found none. The board has voted to place you on administrative leave, pending a full investigation. Harold continued. We've also decided to self-report to the appropriate regulatory agencies and cooperate fully with any investigations. You can't be serious, Victor said, his voice rising, over the allegations of a religious zealot with a grudge. He was studying the Bible in my shop after hours. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. According to his documentation, he was studying for his MBA in business ethics. The Bible study group he leads meets at his church on Wednesday evenings, not at your shop. She consulted her notes. And for the record, his religious beliefs are irrelevant to the validity of his evidence. Victor felt cornered. This is a witch hunt. You're taking his side without hearing mine. We're giving you the courtesy of this meeting, Harold said firmly. The evidence speaks for itself. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. Your company credentials have been suspended, and you are not to contact any employees or visit any Precision Auto locations during the investigation. As if on cue, 2 security guards appeared at the conference room door. Victor stood slowly, straightening his tie in a final gesture of dignity. You'll regret this, he said quietly. All of you. No one responded as he was escorted from the room. 3 days later, the story broke in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The headline was devastating. Auto repair chain accused of systematic fraud and safety violations. Beneath it was a photo of Precision Auto Care's Lake City location, alongside a portrait of Nathaniel Carpenter, described as a whistleblower with an engineering degree and a conscience. The article detailed how Nathaniel had documented months of fraudulent practices while working as a mechanic to gather first-hand evidence for his MBA thesis on ethical reform in the automotive repair industry. I didn't set out to expose Precision Auto specifically, Nathaniel was quoted saying. I was researching industry practices across several companies, but what I witnessed at Precision went beyond the occasional upsell. It was organized deception that put people's safety at risk. The article went on to describe how Nathaniel had recorded conversations with management instructing mechanics to exaggerate repair needs, charge for premium parts while installing cheaper alternatives, and certify vehicles as safe without performing required inspections. Most damning was a section about a family whose minivan had experienced brake failure 2 weeks after a safety inspection at Precision Auto. The accident had resulted in injuries to a mother and her 2 children. The article connected the incident to documentation showing that proper brake system inspections had been skipped to save time, despite being charged to the customer. Victor threw the newspaper across his living room, knocking over a crystal decanter. How dare they? How dare this self-righteous mechanic destroy everything he'd built? His phone had been ringing non-stop since the story broke. Reporters, former colleagues, even his ex-wife. He ignored them all, fortifying himself with expensive scotch and righteous indignation. It was the knock at his door that finally broke through his isolation. forceful, authoritative knocks that couldn't be ignored. When Victor opened the door, he found two serious-looking individuals in suits displaying badges. "Victor Harrington?" the woman asked, though it wasn't really a question. "I'm Agent Morales with the Federal Trade Commission. This is Detective Keller with the Atlanta Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. We'd like to ask you some questions about Precision Auto Group's business practices." Victor stared at them, a cold realization settling over him. This wasn't going away. This wasn't a disgruntled employee making noise that would soon be forgotten. This was real, with real consequences. "I'd like to call my attorney," he managed to say. Agent Morales nodded. That would be advisable. As Victor reached for his phone, he caught sight of himself in the mirror behind the agents. He barely recognized the haggard, frightened man staring back at him. How had it come to this? How had he fallen so far, so fast? And all because of a mechanic he'd underestimated. While Victor Harrington's world was collapsing around him, Nathaniel Carpenter was sitting in a small office at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, discussing the impact of his whistleblowing with journalist Rebecca Taylor. "I never wanted to destroy anyone's career," Nathaniel explained, his expression troubled despite the vindication the newspaper coverage had brought. "I just couldn't stand by while customers, hard-working people who trusted us, were being systematically defrauded." Rebecca studied him with professional curiosity. At 43, she'd been covering business ethics stories for over 15 years, but she'd rarely encountered whistleblowers who seemed so genuinely concerned about the fallout of their actions. "Yet you spent 6 months gathering evidence," she pointed out. "That shows premeditation, not just a crisis of conscience." Nathaniel nodded, acknowledging the observation. "When I started at Precision, it was research for my MBA thesis, a study on ethical challenges in the automotive repair industry. I didn't go in looking for fraud, but during my first week, I witnessed systematic practices that went far beyond the normal upselling that happens in the industry." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I've worked in 4 different auto shops during my research. Most walk a fine line between maximizing profit and serving customers honestly. But Precision crossed that line repeatedly and deliberately. When I realized how widespread it was, and that it came from top-down directives, I knew it needed to be documented properly." "And your faith played a role in this decision?" Rebecca asked, glancing at her notes. A small smile crossed Nathaniel's face. "My faith informs everything I do. The Bible is pretty clear about honesty and protecting the vulnerable. But you don't need to be religious to know that charging elderly customers for repairs that were never performed is wrong." Rebecca tapped her pen against her notepad. "What about the timing? You were fired the night before you went public with your evidence. Some might see that as retaliatory." Nathaniel's expression grew more somber. "I was planning to complete my thesis before taking any action. But when Mr. Harrington fired me for studying after hours, when he made it clear what he thought of me, I realized waiting longer might allow more people to be harmed." "He underestimated you," Rebecca observed. "He did," Nathaniel agreed. "But that's not why I came forward. I came forward because people were being cheated and endangered." He hesitated, then added, "Though I admit there was a certain clarity that came from that interaction. It confirmed everything I'd observed about how the company operated." "What happens now?" Rebecca asked. "For you, I mean." Nathaniel glanced down at his hands, strong, capable hands that had rebuilt engines and diagnosed complex mechanical problems. "I still need to complete my MBA. After that, I've been developing a business plan for an auto repair shop built on total transparency, where customers can watch the repairs being done, where prices are clearly explained, where ethics come before profit." "Sounds idealistic," Rebecca commented, though not unkindly. "It is," Nathaniel acknowledged with a smile. "But someone once told me that idealism backed by competence can change industries. I believe that." As Rebecca wrapped up the interview, she found herself impressed by the quiet conviction of the man sitting across from her. In her experience, whistleblowers were often driven by complex motives: revenge, self-interest, or a desire for recognition mixed with genuine ethical concerns. Nathaniel seemed different, guided by principles that transcended personal gain. "One last question," she said as they stood to conclude the interview. "Do you have any regrets about how this has unfolded?" Nathaniel considered the question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary," he finally said. "I regret that customers were harmed, and I regret that Mr. Harrington created a culture where this kind of behavior was rewarded." He paused. "But I don't regret standing up for what's right, even when it cost me my job." As Rebecca watched him leave, she couldn't help but wonder if Victor Harrington now regretted his dismissive treatment of the mechanic he'd so severely underestimated. The next several weeks brought significant changes for both men. For Victor, the consequences of his business practices cascaded relentlessly. The Federal Trade Commission launched a formal investigation into Precision Auto Group. The State Attorney General's office opened a separate inquiry into consumer fraud. 3 class action lawsuits were filed on behalf of customers who had been overcharged or received substandard repairs. The board of directors formally terminated his employment and initiated their own lawsuit against him for breach of fiduciary duty. His personal assets were frozen pending the outcome of the various investigations. Victor's carefully constructed world was disintegrating piece by piece. On a rainy Tuesday, 5 weeks after the story broke, Victor sat alone in his condominium, staring at the formal notice of criminal charges that had arrived that morning. Wire fraud, consumer fraud, criminal negligence. The potential penalties included substantial fines and prison time. How had it come to this? He had only done what was necessary to grow the business, to satisfy shareholders, to build something successful. Yes, there had been shortcuts. Yes, customers sometimes paid for more than they received. But wasn't that just business? Wasn't that how the world worked? Victor poured himself another drink, his 5th of the day, though it was barely noon. The alcohol no longer dulled the panic that had become his constant companion. It merely blurred the edges of his new reality. The doorbell rang, startling him so badly that he knocked over his glass. Who could it be now? More reporters, another process server. He considered ignoring it, but the visitor was persistent. When he finally opened the door, the last person he expected to see was standing in the hallway. "Mr. Harrington," Nathaniel Carpenter said quietly. "May I come in?" Victor stared at him in disbelief. "Are you serious? You destroy my life and then show up at my door for what? To gloat?" Nathaniel's expression remained calm. "I'm not here to gloat. I'm here because I'm concerned about you." A bitter laugh escaped Victor's throat. "Concerned? That's rich. Save your Christian charity for someone who wants it." Despite Victor's hostility, Nathaniel didn't leave. "I meant what I said that night. I've been praying for you." "Lot of good that did," Victor muttered, but he stepped aside, allowing Nathaniel to enter. What did it matter anymore? The contrast between them was stark. Nathaniel, despite his modest clothes, carried himself with quiet dignity. Victor, unshaven and disheveled in what had once been an expensive dress shirt, now stained with scotch, looked like a shadow of his former self. Nathaniel took in the state of the condominium. Empty bottles, newspapers with damning headlines, legal documents scattered across every surface, but made no comment. "Why are you really here?" Victor demanded, collapsing onto his sofa. Nathaniel remained standing. "Because I believe in accountability, not destruction. What's happening to you now isn't what I wanted. What did you expect would happen?" Victor gestured wildly at the legal notices. "You exposed systematic fraud at a major company and implicated me directly. Did you think they'd give me a slap on the wrist?" "I expected consequences," Nathaniel acknowledged, "but I didn't take joy in causing them. There's a difference." Victor studied him through narrowed eyes. So what now? You've had your revenge. I've lost everything. Are you satisfied? This was never about revenge, Nathaniel said firmly. It was about doing what was right, about protecting people who trusted Precision Auto with their safety. He paused. And for the record, I don't believe you've lost everything. No? Victor laughed bitterly. My career is over. My reputation is destroyed. I'm facing criminal charges. Please tell me what I haven't lost. Your chance to make amends, Nathaniel said simply. Your opportunity to do the right thing, even now. Victor stared at him in disbelief. You can't be serious. I am. Nathaniel finally sat down in the chair opposite Victor. The investigators I've spoken with are most interested in the systematic nature of the fraud, how it was implemented across multiple locations, who else was involved in directing it. Your perspective would be valuable. You want me to cooperate with the people trying to put me in prison? Victor asked incredulously. I want you to take responsibility for your actions, Nathaniel corrected. And yes, that might mean legal consequences. But it could also mean a chance to mitigate those consequences by helping authorities understand the full scope of what happened. Victor was silent for a long moment, studying the man across from him. Why do you care what happens to me? I fired you. I disrespected you. I dismissed everything about you. Because my faith teaches forgiveness and redemption, Nathaniel replied without hesitation. Because I believe everyone deserves a chance to make things right. And because despite everything, I don't think you're an evil person, misguided perhaps, corrupted by success and greed, but not beyond redemption. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and it pierced through Victor's defensive anger in a way nothing else had. You don't know me, Victor said, but his voice had lost its edge. I know enough, Nathaniel responded. I've worked with hundreds of people over the years. I've seen good people make bad choices when pressured or tempted. I've also seen people find their way back. Victor turned away, unable to maintain eye contact. It's too late for that. It's never too late to do the right thing, Nathaniel said quietly. That's something I believe with my whole heart. They sat in silence for several minutes, the only sound the ticking of an expensive clock that Victor had purchased to celebrate a particularly profitable quarter. Why were you really studying in the shop that night? Victor finally asked, the question that had been nagging at him for weeks. A small smile crossed Nathaniel's face. Exactly what I told you. The power in my apartment building had been unreliable since the storm. I had exams coming up. The shop was quiet, well lit, and I'd finished all my assigned work. He shrugged. It seemed practical, not to gather more evidence against me. If that had been my goal, I would have been more discreet, Nathaniel pointed out reasonably. I wasn't hiding. I was just studying. Victor nodded slowly, accepting the explanation. Your degree, it's really in mechanical engineering? Yes, Georgia Tech. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through school. And the MBA? Business ethics focus? Part-time executive program while I worked? Another silence fell between them. I've never understood people like you, Victor admitted after a while. People with faith, Nathaniel asked. People with principles that don't bend. Victor struggled to articulate the concept. When I started in this business 30 years ago, I had ideals too. But the reality of the marketplace, the pressure to grow, to beat competitors, to satisfy investors, it changes you. Compromises that seem small at first become standard practice. Lines get blurry. Nathaniel considered this. I understand the pressure. I've felt it too, but I've always believed that integrity isn't something you can compromise just a little. Once you start, where does it end? Apparently it ends with federal charges and class action lawsuits, Victor said with a hollow laugh. It doesn't have to end there, Nathaniel said, leaning forward. You still have choices. Difficult ones, yes, but choices nonetheless. Victor looked around his once pristine living room, now cluttered with evidence of his downfall. What would you do if you were me? I'd tell the truth, Nathaniel said without hesitation. All of it. I'd take responsibility for my actions, make whatever amends are possible, and then find a way forward with the lessons learned. Just like that? Victor asked skeptically. No, not just like that, Nathaniel acknowledged. It would be the hardest thing you've ever done, but also potentially the most important. Victor stared out the window at the Atlanta skyline, the city where he'd built his business and his reputation, both now in ruins. I don't know if I can do that, he admitted quietly. You don't have to know right now, Nathaniel said, standing to leave, but I hope you'll consider it. At the door, Nathaniel paused. I meant what I said about praying for you, Mr. Harrington. Not for your downfall, but for your redemption. After Nathaniel left, Victor remained by the window for a long time, watching the sun set over the city. For the first time in weeks, he didn't reach for the scotch. Instead, he picked up the phone and called his attorney. Sandra, he said when she answered, I've been thinking. What would happen if I cooperated with the investigators? Over the next several months, the Precision Auto Group scandal continued to unfold. Victor Harrington, in a move that shocked many, agreed to cooperate fully with federal and state investigators. He provided detailed information about how the fraudulent practices had developed and spread throughout the company. He testified against other executives who had implemented and enforced the policies. He made no excuses for his role, accepting full responsibility for the culture he had created. In exchange for his cooperation, prosecutors agreed to recommend reduced charges. He would still face significant penalties, financial restitution, probation, and likely some prison time, but far less than he might have received had he fought the charges. The media coverage shifted subtly. While still critical of his actions, there was now an element of redemption in the narrative. Disgraced CEO cooperates with authorities, replaced auto chain executive faces prison in the headlines. Meanwhile, Nathaniel Carpenter completed his MBA and began implementing the business plan he'd developed for an ethical auto repair shop. Using his settlement from a wrongful termination lawsuit against Precision Auto Group, which had been taken over by new management committed to reform, he secured a small commercial property on the outskirts of Atlanta. Carpenter Automotive opened with little fanfare, but a clear mission statement prominently displayed in the waiting area. Honest repairs at fair prices, no exceptions. And the shop featured transparent pricing, detailed explanations of all recommended repairs, and a customer education program that taught basic vehicle maintenance. Most revolutionary was the observation area where customers could watch as mechanics worked on their vehicles, asking questions throughout the process. Former Precision Auto customers, burned by the company's fraudulent practices, began to seek out Carpenter Automotive. Word of mouth spread. Within 6 months, Nathaniel had hired 2 additional mechanics and an office manager to handle the growing business. On a crisp autumn morning, nearly a year after their confrontation in the service bay, Nathaniel looked up from a transmission he was rebuilding to see a familiar figure standing in the doorway of his shop. Victor Harrington looked different, thinner, humbler, dressed in simple clothes rather than an expensive suit. His sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following week, and most expected he would serve at least some time in a minimum security facility. Mr. Harrington, Nathaniel greeted him, wiping his hands on a shop towel. This is unexpected. Victor nodded, looking around the immaculate shop with its state-of-the-art equipment and busy service bays. I wanted to see it for myself. Your honest shop. There was no mockery in his tone, only genuine curiosity. Would you like a tour? Nathaniel offered. For the next 30 minutes, Nathaniel showed Victor around Carpenter Automotive, explaining the transparent pricing model, the observation area for customers, and the apprenticeship program he'd started for disadvantaged youth interested in mechanical careers. It's impressive, Victor acknowledged when they finished in Nathaniel's small office. And profitable? We're doing well, Nathaniel confirmed. Turns out people appreciate honesty. They're willing to pay fair prices for quality work. We're not cutting corners, and we're still growing faster than I anticipated." Victor nodded slowly. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about integrity not being something you can compromise just a little." He looked down at his hands. "I wish I'd understood that 30 years ago." "It's never too late to learn," Nathaniel said quietly. "Maybe not to learn, but sometimes it is too late to avoid consequences," Victor replied, a sad smile crossing his face. "I'll be heading to Lexington next week, minimum security, but still prison." "I know. I'm sorry it came to that." Victor shook his head. "Don't be. I earned these consequences. Every one of them." He paused. "But I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" Nathaniel was genuinely surprised. "For showing me there was still a choice, even after everything fell apart. For believing redemption was possible." Victor met his eyes directly. "You showed me more grace than I deserved." "Grace isn't about deserving," Nathaniel said simply. "It's about second chances freely given." They were interrupted by Nathaniel's office manager, Sarah, informing him that his next appointment had arrived. "I should go," Victor said, standing. "I just wanted to see this place, and to say thank you in person." As they walked toward the exit, Victor paused. The sign outside, Proverbs 22:1. What does that mean? Nathaniel smiled. "A good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold." Victor nodded thoughtfully. "Fitting. I've always thought so." At the door, Victor extended his hand. "Good luck with your business, Nathaniel." Nathaniel shook it firmly. "Good luck with your journey, Victor. I'll keep praying for you." This time, Victor didn't scoff or roll his eyes. He simply nodded in acknowledgement, a small but significant shift from the man who had once dismissed faith as a fairy tale for the weak. As Victor walked away, Nathaniel watched him go, reminded of his grandfather's words about the measure of a person. Victor Harrington had failed that measure once, but perhaps he was finding his way toward a different standard now. Inside, a customer was waiting to learn about their vehicle, trusting that this shop, unlike so many others, would tell them the unvarnished truth. Nathaniel turned back to his work, grateful for the path that had led him here, even with its unexpected twists and confrontations. In the end, the agnostic manager had caught the Christian mechanic studying in the dark. But what happened next had surprised everyone, perhaps most of all Victor Harrington himself. 3 years later, Nathaniel Carpenter stood at the podium in a conference center filled with automotive industry professionals. At 34, he had become something of a reluctant celebrity in the field, the whistleblower who had exposed industry-wide fraud and then created a new business model that was transforming how auto repairs were conducted. Carpenter Automotive had expanded to 3 locations across Georgia. Each operated on the same principles of transparency, education, and fair pricing. Each was profitable, defying industry skeptics who had insisted that honesty and profitability couldn't coexist in the automotive repair business. "The question I'm asked most frequently," Nathaniel told the audience, "is whether ethical business practices can scale. Can honesty work beyond a small owner-operated shop? My answer is always the same. Not only can it scale, but it must scale if we want to restore consumer trust in our industry." From the back of the room, a latecomer slipped in quietly. Victor Harrington, now 55, had served 14 months in a minimum security facility before being released on probation. The years had aged him, but there was a clarity in his expression that hadn't been there before. Nathaniel continued his presentation, outlining the Carpenter Automotive model and sharing metrics that demonstrated its success. Customer retention rates above 90%. Profit margins consistent with industry averages, despite never engaging in unnecessary upselling. Employee satisfaction scores that far exceeded typical auto repair shops. "We've found that when you build a business on integrity, everything else tends to align," Nathaniel explained. "Employees take pride in their work because they never have to lie to customers. Customers become advocates because they know they can trust us. Even our suppliers prefer working with us because our ordering is predictable and honest. After the presentation, as attendees gathered in small groups for refreshments, Victor approached Nathaniel. "That was quite a speech," he said, extending his hand. "Congratulations on your success." Nathaniel shook his hand warmly. "Victor, I didn't know you'd be here. I'm consulting now," Victor explained, "helping companies identify and address ethical vulnerabilities before they become systemic problems." A self-deprecating smile crossed his face. "Turns out, there's a market for someone who understands how things go wrong from the inside." "That's unexpected," Nathaniel admitted. "Life often is," Victor agreed. "When I was released, I had to decide what to do with whatever time I have left. Using my experience to help prevent others from making the same mistakes seemed like the right choice." They found a quiet corner away from the crowd, each with a cup of coffee. "How are you really?" Nathaniel asked. Victor considered the question seriously. "Humbled. Wiser, I hope. Still making amends where I can." He looked around at the industry gathering. "Most of these people wouldn't give me the time of day 3 years ago. Now some actually seek my advice, though others still see me as a cautionary tale. And spiritually," Nathaniel ventured. A thoughtful expression crossed Victor's face. "That's more complicated. I wouldn't say I've had a dramatic conversion, if that's what you're asking. But prison gives a man time to think, to read, to question his assumptions." He sipped his coffee. "I've been attending a discussion group. People of various faiths, some with none, talking about big questions. It's helpful." "That sounds like progress," Nathaniel said with a smile. "Baby steps," Victor agreed, "but in the right direction, I think." They talked for nearly an hour. Two men whose lives had intersected in such a dramatic way, now finding common ground in their shared commitment to industry reform. As they prepared to part ways, Victor said, "I never properly apologized to you, did I, for how I treated you that night and before, for underestimating you because of your faith and your position." "You didn't," Nathaniel acknowledged, "but your actions since then have spoken louder than any apology could." "Still, I am sorry," Victor said sincerely. "My arrogance cost us both a great deal, though you've clearly landed on your feet." "So have you, in your own way," Nathaniel pointed out. "Different path than you expected, but perhaps a more meaningful one." Victor nodded slowly. "Perhaps so." He glanced at his watch. "I should go. I'm meeting with a group of industry executives about implementing transparency practices." Ironic, isn't it? Me advocating for transparency. "Not ironic," Nathaniel corrected. "Redemptive." As Victor walked away, Nathaniel reflected on the long, strange journey that had brought them both to this point. The night in the service bay seemed like a lifetime ago, a confrontation between two men who had fundamentally misunderstood each other, yet whose collision had ultimately benefited them both, albeit through difficult paths. Nathaniel's phone buzzed with a message from his wife, Rachel, reminding him about their son's baseball game that evening. Life had expanded in beautiful ways he couldn't have anticipated 3 years ago. His business was thriving. His family was growing. His ministry at church, where he led a group for entrepreneurs seeking to integrate faith and business ethics, was bearing fruit. None of it would have happened quite this way if not for that night when an agnostic manager caught a Christian mechanic studying in the dark. God did indeed work in mysterious ways. The final chapter of their intertwined story unfolded 5 years later on a warm spring day when Nathaniel received an unexpected call. "Nathaniel, it's Victor Harrington. I need your help." Nathaniel was surprised to hear from Victor. Their paths had crossed occasionally at industry events, but it had been nearly a year since their last conversation. "Of course," Nathaniel replied. "What can I do for you?" "It's about Redemptive Enterprises," Victor said, referring to the non-profit organization he had founded after completing his probation. The organization helped formerly incarcerated individuals find employment in the automotive and other technical industries. We've received a major opportunity, but I need a partner with credibility and resources. They met that afternoon at Victor's modest office. At 60, Victor's hair had turned completely white, but his eyes were clear and focused, free of the arrogance that had once defined him. The Department of Labor is offering grants for programs that train and employ people with criminal records, Victor explained, spreading documents across his desk. With my background, Redemptive Enterprises has the expertise, but not the industry standing to secure the funding alone. Nathaniel studied the proposal. You want Carpenter Automotive to partner with you? Yes. We'd develop a specialized training program, and your shops would serve as both training facilities and potential employers for graduates. Victor leaned forward. These are people who made mistakes, Nathaniel. Just like I did. They deserve a second chance. The passion in Victor's voice was genuine. Somewhere along his journey, he had found a purpose that transcended profit margins and shareholder value. Nathaniel considered the proposal carefully. Carpenter Automotive had grown to 7 locations across 3 states. The business model, built on transparency and ethics, had proven not just viable, but extraordinarily successful. He had the resources to support such a partnership, but was it the right fit? Why me? Nathaniel asked finally. There are larger chains you could approach. Victor smiled slightly. Because you, more than anyone, understand redemption. You saw it in me when I couldn't see it in myself. The simplicity and honesty of the answer resonated with Nathaniel. Let me pray about it and discuss it with my leadership team, he said, but my initial reaction is positive. 2 weeks later, they announced the partnership. Carpenter Automotive would work with Redemptive Enterprises to create a comprehensive training program for formerly incarcerated individuals seeking careers in automotive repair. The Department of Labor grant would fund the initiative for 3 years, with the goal of becoming self-sustaining afterward. At the press conference, a reporter asked the question that had been circulating in industry circles. Mr. Carpenter, given your history with Victor Harrington, aren't you concerned about partnering with him? Nathaniel glanced at Victor before answering. Our history is precisely why this partnership makes sense. Both of us understand that people are more than their worst mistakes. Both of us believe in second chances, and both of us have seen firsthand how lives can change when people are given the opportunity to make amends and move forward. The first cohort of trainees began the program 3 months later, 15 men and women with criminal records, but a desire to rebuild their lives. They learned not just the technical skills of automotive repair, but also the ethics of the Carpenter Automotive approach. Victor worked alongside them, sharing his own journey from corporate fraud to redemption. His story resonated with the trainees in ways that traditional instructors couldn't match. He understood their struggles, their temptations, and their desire to create a different future. On the day the first cohort graduated, Nathaniel watched as Victor addressed them with tears in his eyes. 10 years ago, I was where many of you have been, facing the consequences of my actions, uncertain about the future, carrying the weight of past mistakes, Victor told them. Today, you stand at the beginning of a new chapter. You've acquired skills, yes, but more importantly, you've embraced an ethical framework that will serve you throughout your careers. Later, as they watched the graduates celebrating with their families, Victor turned to Nathaniel. Thank you, he said simply. For the partnership, Nathaniel asked. Victor shook his head. For that night in the service bay. For seeing something in me worth saving, even when I was at my worst, Nathaniel smiled. That's what faith does. It helps us see beyond the surface to the potential beneath. I think I understand that now, Victor said quietly. And in that moment, Nathaniel realized that the greatest surprise in their unlikely story wasn't the downfall of a corrupt executive or the rise of an ethical business model. It was the transformation of a man who had once dismissed faith as a fairy tale, but now recognized its power to change lives, including his own. The agnostic manager had caught the Christian mechanic studying in the dark. What happened next had indeed surprised everyone. But perhaps the most surprising outcome of all was that two men who should have remained adversaries had instead become partners in redemption, their lives testifying to the power of second chances and the unexpected ways that grace manifests in the world. As they walked among the graduates, men and women whose lives were being restored through opportunity and accountability, Nathaniel was reminded of the words he'd shared with Victor years ago. Grace isn't about deserving. It's about second chances freely given. In the end, that was the story they were writing together, a story of grace that extended far beyond themselves to touch countless other lives, a story that had begun in conflict but was continuing in collaboration, a story still unfolding in ways neither of them could have predicted on that fateful night when prejudice and underestimation gave way to respect and eventually to redemption.